Blue and red lights spilled across the white fences at Mapleton Oaks and made them look like bones. Sprinklers hissed. Neighbors froze on porches with their phones up, and I stood beside my black sedan with my palms lifted shoulder height, calm as a lake under wind, watching the HOA president. Ethan Johnson, steel gray hair, country club jaw, that tight HOA smile they hand you with the bylaws. Pinch a clear bag of white powder between latex-gloved fingers like he'd just landed a marlin. "There it is," he said to Deputy Raymond Jackson as if delivering a golf score. "Told you she was hiding something." His "she" carried that polite edge I'd heard in boardrooms and traffic stops since I was 12. Not a slur, just a hinge that swung one door for them and another for me. Raymond nodded and reached toward his cuffs with practiced sympathy. I kept my eyes on Ethan and said nothing. Mapleton Oaks loved silence almost as much as it loved rules. When the first cuff grazed my wrist, I let out a breath, slid my hand into my blazer, and flipped a rectangle of gold and blue toward the strobes so it flashed like a second siren. "Director Aaliyah Reed, Drug Enforcement Administration," I said, syllables level and precise. The night broke. The clipboard kid from the gate swallowed a whole breath and nearly dropped his pen. Raymond's smirk slid off like sweat. Ethan's mouth opened and stayed there, a fish in air. The bag in his hand trembled. He stepped backward, heels skidding on smooth concrete. For a second, he stayed upright through sheer HOA stubbornness. Then he folded at the knees and hit the pavement with a dry gasp. The crowd murmured as if a sermon had ended. I pointed to the bag. "Keep that sealed," I said, "and call an ambulance. My team will verify its origin." No shouting. No grandstanding. Just process. Mapleton Oaks liked process when it punished other people. It hated process when it looked back. 57 days earlier, I'd moved here under a name the HOA would print without asking how to pronounce. 57 days was enough to learn that the rules weren't rules. They were leverage. Random inspection at the gate because my sedan had an odor, a board member, reminding me to keep the neighborhood's look. Neighbor walking his golden retriever past my place twice as slow. Any time my mother visited after physical therapy. I documented it all because documentation is what keeps you warm when empathy won't. The paramedics lifted Ethan, sweat beading beneath his perfect part, and he avoided my eyes, whispering to his treasurer, Wade, who avoided mine too. I texted one word to a number that didn't exist on county servers. "Ready." 2 unmarked SUVs rounded the Oaks and parked with the quiet of practiced entry. My agents drifted out in polos and windbreakers. If Mapleton Oaks noticed the shoes, it knew. If it only saw the smiles, it was about to learn. "Secure the bag," I said to Ortega, our forensic lead, "and pull gatehouse feeds." She nodded, already gloved. Raymond's hand hovered, uncertain. He and Ethan were on a first-name basis at every barbecue. I didn't need the photos to know that. He finally said, "Director, is this federal now?" I let the quiet answer it for me. Mapleton Oaks loved quiet until it was held up like a mirror. The night thinned. Neighbors whispered thank gods and about times, and also a few not in our neighborhoods. The biases were soft as velvet and cut as clean as glass. At dawn, sprinklers replaced sirens. The fountain at the entrance bubbled like nothing had fractured, and someone taped a note to my mailbox. "We keep standards," a line so careful it squeaked. In my kitchen, I poured coffee and opened the encrypted lab ping. The bag Ethan found matched a 2019 evidence batch by Serial Microprint and Purity Curve, which meant someone had lifted from an evidence locker and washed it through the community safety theater at our gates. At 9, Cole, my second, voice like gravel that had learned manners, called from the task room. "We mapped their fines," he said, 67 over $5,000 in 18 months. Routing through Maple Development Group. Shell owned by a Jackson law firm. Tie-in to the deputy prosecutor via marriage to the HOA's counsel. Corruption draws straight lines once you flip the map. I didn't get to reply. Ethan himself came to my door in a navy blazer with a folder hugged to his chest like a hymn book. He wore the same smile he used at ribbon cuttings. I opened the door, let the sun pick up my badge again without showing it. His gaze bucked. "Director Reed?" he said, the syllables too neat. I came to clear up a misunderstanding. We both let that hang. "Property values," he added softly, as if appealing to patriotism. We can't have the feds crawling all over. Makes people nervous. Why would innocent people be nervous? I asked. A beat? He smoothed the folder. You may not be a fit for our community's expectations, he said, like telling someone a dress code. The sentence wanted to be uglier. It stayed dressed for church. Expectations like planting evidence? I said. He blinked. Careful with accusations, he said. I watched his eyes note my mother's framed photo by the stairs, clock the scar on my thumb from Quantico, tally, measure, discount, reframe. We'll handle it with dignity, he said. You can fix this quietly. Complex how people who weaponize quiet expect it to save them. 2 hours later, I met Cole and Ortega at a cafe outside the gates. Iced air, one espresso machine singing, Ortega sliding a folder across sticky wood. Gatehouse feed caught the exchange, she said. Still frame, Raymond's cruiser just out of frame, Ethan leaning at the passenger window, a napkin folded twice. They call it clean streets, Cole said. Group chat with HOA board, treasurer, deputy. Code words, seed drop and case closed. The words never say what they are. They never have to. That evening, the HOA meeting filled the clubhouse with the smell of lemon cleaner and manufactured calm. Wade kept the minutes like he was polishing silver. Ethan chaired with his little gavel. When I walked in, the room shifted as if someone had tilted the floor. Ms. Reed, he said, gavel barely touching wood, homeowners may speak during the open period. I set a slim manila on the table and slid a still across the laminate, Ethan's hand reaching into my passenger seat. His face drained one shade. A board member, gray hair golf tan, said, Ethan? Like a plea. Wade flinched. Whispers popped like static. This is a federal audit now, I said. Preserve everything. Delete nothing. We don't delete, Wade said too fast. We archive. The room made a sound like a held breath. Later, near midnight, my motion sensors tripped. 2 figures in hoodies approached my garage. They moved like men who'd learned not to trip cameras. One poured gasoline. The other flexed a crowbar. I said, Step away from the vehicle. Steady, low. They spun. My porch light caught their patches. Mapleton Oak Security. They ran. 2 unmarked SUVs sealed both ends of the lane. Cole's silhouette took shape in the flood. Caught, he said. When I raised the wiper blade, the painted message screamed red on glass. Stop digging now! I smiled without humor. Every threat is a confession. By dawn, the guards had given us everything. Ethan's cash, Wade's plan, Raymond's nod, $2 grand each to remind the new neighbor our standards are firm. Attempted arson, witness tampering, obstruction. I could have arrested then. I wanted the source. Mid-morning, Ortega whispered in my ear by the community pool. The one with laminated rules no one reads until they need a weapon. Fines over $2,000 passed through EJ Holdings, she said. Owner Ethan Johnson. 30% kicks to an account owned by Deputy Raymond Jackson. 3 seized homes flipped through the same broker. Same notary. A full loop in a cul-de-sac. I told Cole, freeze EJ. Flag all HOA transfers. Nothing moves without federal clearance. He nodded. The neighborhood stiffened. Early evening, I watched them on the clubhouse camera my team had lawfully tapped. Ethan at the head, Wade to his right, attorney to his left. The spreadsheet on the screen behind them listed names and colors. Green compliant, yellow monitor, red problem. My name pulsed red. Next to it, code 9. The legend read, evidence placement with sheriff authorization. Purge logs, Ethan told Wade. Paul stall subpoenas. Paul the lawyer pinched his nose. That's obstruction, he said. It's community defense. Ethan replied, and for the first time a crack showed where confidence had lived. The next afternoon I walked into the sheriff's department and asked for Raymond. He came out with the swagger of a parade. I slid a printout of the $50,000 consulting transfer across the table. Loan, he said too quick. Then he watched my recorder and swallowed a different word. I didn't raise my voice. I let the pressure do its work. 10 minutes later, he named a web. Contractors, a bank manager, a deputy prosecutor, a property firm in Baton Rouge called Stonebrook Management. They were flipping seized houses inside 3 weeks, he said. We got a cut for community safety. They called it an initiative. I clicked stop. Congratulations, I said. You're the first domino. By 6 p.m., unmarked vehicles glided into Mapleton Oaks like evening shadows. Team 1 at Ethan's home. Team 2 at the HOA office. Team 3 at a storage unit in Wade's maiden aunt's name. Cole's voice in my earpiece. We've got a safe behind a false wall. Then, Director, you should see this. Ortega lifted bags from the safe one by one, DEA evidence numbers, the same series as my planted bag, filled with marked cocaine, heroin, fentanyl. A suburban reliquary of theft. When they walked Ethan out, neighbors watched from half-closed blinds, clutching dogs and pearls and coffee cups. Nobody said a slur. They didn't have to. The eyes could write it all. The morning after, yellow tape ribboned the HOA office. News vans mated with the curb. Microphones sprouted like weeds. Director Reed, a reporter called, was Mapleton Oaks part of a larger ring? I had my ongoing investigation face on. I already knew the answer. Inside our mobile room, Cole laid out a forest of ledgers, and Ortega tapped a cluster of wires on a screen. Stonebrook links to a DC shell called Fairmont Consulting, she said. Federal subcontractor for evidence storage. My pulse ticked higher. Fairmont had a contract I'd fought for years ago, money to secure narcotics storage and modernize audit trails. The restricted number that called an hour later had a voice like a smile with no teeth. You've done enough, it said. Walk away and retire. Keep going and you won't see next week. It hung up before I could say, see you then. The next morning, a young woman with sleepless eyes and a blazer she hadn't yet learned to live in knocked on my door and introduced herself as Rachel Pierce, ex-Fairmont auditor. She wrapped both hands around the coffee I gave her and told me what she'd seen. An overflow retention flag in the evidence software that quietly siphoned a portion of destruction shipments into private storage. Rotations across regional facilities to scatter the audit scent. Community safety initiatives like Mapleton Oaks as preferred endpoints. They called it recycling, she said. Nobody had to say what it was out loud. I put her in a safe room, called Cole, and said, we're going bigger. Pull Fairmont servers. A sealed warrant, a 3 a.m. entry, and a mountain of ledgers later, we had a term at the top of a presentation. Project Whitehall. Underneath, Stonebrook as primary distributor. 12 HOA networks across 4 states. One line redacted, Federal Liaison. The lights at my house flickered twice that dawn and died. The line at the box had been cut clean. 3 shots spiderwebbed my living room window. A sedan vanished into mist. I watched the sun crawl up a quiet street and thought about the first bag and how empires crumble from one loose thread when you pull it long enough. I called Senator Evelyn Ross and asked for a closed hearing. She has a voice like iron and good bourbon. You'll have it by Friday, she said. Wear clean shoes. We flew to D.C. in a quiet Gulf Stream that picked up a tail 30 minutes over Carolina. The message to my phone read, "Stop the leak or you won't land." We diverted to Richmond under FBI escort and moved to a safe house in Arlington. Rachel decrypted the last Fairmont folder, a presentation labeled Whitehall Initiative Phase 4. Revenue optimization via civil forfeiture integration, asset cycling via controlled redistribution under exempt supply chain. At the bottom, Harold Westfield's signature, my old mentor's, and beside it, forged approval metadata showing my own credentials. Ross's hearing room smelled like paper and consequence. I told them the story end to end, the gate, the napkin, the seeds, the safe, the network. Westfield appeared with a calm face and the word deepfake in his pocket. Ross said, "Then you won't mind a forensic review." And he hesitated half a heartbeat too long. After the session, D.C. rain polished the sidewalks and the Capitol's dome floated on the reflecting pool like a coin in a well. Inside the safe house, the next dawn we found the kill phrase running through DOJ servers, echo phase, asset transfers offshore. Deletions masked as maintenance. Acting AG Caldwell had replaced oversight 48 hours earlier and had started scrubbing within 12. I carried drives to the Sentinel and told editor Maya Lang, "If I disappear, you publish this." She didn't laugh. That night, Rachel found a video in Fairmont archives. Westfield in a conference room telling a suited man and a DOJ badge that reallocating seized narcotics would fund enforcement without taxpayers seeing the bill. "If anyone finds out," he said, "we'll have our scapegoat, high enough to satisfy the press, idealistic enough to never suspect." The word hung there like a hook. I said, "Then the scapegoat writes the ending." We pushed the last package to Senate servers, to press mirrors, to dead man drops wired to open in 12 hours. While the bars crept to 95%, unmarked SUVs rolled up on our auxiliary site like wolves. Glass shattered, a flashbang went off, and Cole shouted us through a smoke tunnel into rain. We made the car with one drive still warm from Rachel's palm. At 6 a.m., 12 hours later, the files bloomed across the world. By 6:05, Whitehall Gate trended. By 6:10, DOJ's site went maintenance. By 7, the SUVs were back on our bumper. Ross staged a press conference at 10. I told the truth on camera without burnishing. If our system can weaponize the law to steal from the innocent, no one is safe. The room clapped, but Cole's whisper cut through my earpiece. Rachel's signal dropped. "West entrance." Her phone lay cracked beside a dark-suited shadow in the last frame. Caldwell's security chief. We traced to a DOJ forfeiture warehouse by the river where evidence goes to vanish. Caldwell stood over Rachel like a surgeon without consent. I broke the door, Cole dropped one guard, and the other ran. Caldwell slipped into fog with a briefcase that would scream its secrets later. Rachel clutched the last drive. We pushed it to every mirror with signatures that even denial couldn't unwrite. Daylight broke on a Capitol surrounded by protest signs and cameras, and the fragile look that truth has when it finally crawls out of its hole. Westfield resigned with a paragraph that used words like service and distraction. Caldwell went to ground. Stonebrook doors opened to warrants like flares. Mapleton Oaks at last was only a neighborhood again, just people and hedges and dogs, and also a caution sign. Neighbors who'd watched me with narrowed eyes now waved with two hands. Others still looked past me like I was furniture. Bias doesn't evaporate when you serve a warrant. It evaporates when people practice better habits, and that takes longer than a news cycle. Weeks later, the HOA sign came down for replacement. The board dissolved under a consent decree. The clubhouse became a polling site. The fountain still bubbled, but without the hum of fear. I drove past the gate at sunset where the golden hour painted the oaks honey. The same fence that looked like bones that first night now looked like a fence again. Standards are fine. Weapons aren't. My mother came by for tea and shook her head at the stack of subpoenas. "You always did your homework," she said. I laughed. I told her the first time a principal called me articulate how the compliment wore teeth. She patted my hand. "People tell you who they are," she said. "They always do." Across the country, hearings spiraled, ledgers talked, and programs shuttered. Some resignations came with apologies. Most came with silence dressed as transition. That's fine. Truth doesn't need their music to dance. What stayed with me wasn't the camera flashes, or the safe cracking open, or even Ethan folding when the badge hit the light. It was smaller. It was the clipboard kid at the gate the first night. How his hands shook when the story flipped. How later he left a note on my stoop that said, "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up." No name, just ink. Contrition without credit. That's how habits change. Not by speeches, but by 100 minor courses corrected before impact. The night Ethan hid that bag in my car, he wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was feeding a machine that hated mess and loved order and pretended that the two were the same. The machine had learned to say standards when it meant control, to say safety when it meant silence, to say neighbor when it meant know your place. And if I'm honest, the machine didn't start with Ethan. It started wherever comfort convinced decent people to overlook how power behaved when no one watched. I parked beneath the same maple whose shadow had once held 2 security guards, and I looked at my sedan's clean glass and thought about those 3 red words. I'm still digging. Not to bury anyone, but to unearth. There are more neighborhoods. There always are. There are more polite sentences that slice. More laminated rules that double as weapons. The badge doesn't fix that. It just opens doors. People fix it. So I document and I call things what they are, and I stare down expectations until they either break or become honest. And when the next HOA king in a blazer leans toward a camera to explain a misunderstanding, I'll be there with the paperwork and a warrant and a memory of maple leaves shining in blue and red. When the cuffs close, the neighbors will whisper, and some will tell the old stories again, and some will write new ones. And somewhere in that quiet, one kid with a clipboard will decide to speak the right thing at the right time. That's the win I chase. That's the ending I want. Not the collapse of a man on the asphalt under lights, though I'll take it when justice requires, but the collapse of a habit. The slow, beautiful failure of a system that forgot what community meant until someone held up a mirror. Standards are what you do for each other, not what you do to each other. That's my memo to Mapleton Oaks and every place like it. And when someone asks later why I flashed a badge instead of letting them teach me a lesson, I'll tell them the truth. They already taught me plenty. I just took better notes.